instructions of how to change it, what to do with it. Well, since we are there, this automatically came into Adobe Camera Raw because it was a fairly old shot. And so it needed to be updated to a newer base of image pixels. So it came into Adobe Camera Raw. Now, what I wanted to point out in Adobe Camera Raw, which we'll get into later also, you see all the red up in the windows. Up in the upper portion here in the upper right, that triangle on the left, if it's clicked on, will show you blue, where if it's very dark and blown out. The little rectangle on the top on the right shows me highlights that are blown out. So anywhere that it's red, because that triangle is clicked on, means that they are blown out. And if you look at the histogram, it would be hard to see that, except way over on the right here, there's a little bit touching the right-hand side, which are those right windows. But before I fix that, by just lowering the highlights, back up at the top of the new formats for Adobe Camera Raw, right where it says Edit, to the right of that, has Auto. And if you click Auto, it does a lot of predefined work for you. Let me show you the basic tab. By clicking Auto, it has moved the highlight slider down, it adjusted exposure, whites, blacks, vibrance. So it's a neat first step. Now here is the blues, meaning those are black areas without any detail. That's what this in the upper right here in the histogram, that little triangle on the left, are shadows. So now I really could do more by opening the shadows a little bit if I want, and you see I'm bringing back detail in all those dark areas. So very effective aspect in Adobe Camera Raw. I'll open this. Now, let me ask you, what more would you do to this image? What would you do? What would you think about doing to this image? And I don't mean flip it.
You would probably want to straighten the perspective.
That's correct. We want to straighten it. So you select all, edit, transform. Let's try perspective. Move the upper left one to the right. And unfortunately, straightening it, remove the window on the left and maybe the one on the right, but that's all right. We'll just go with this for a minute. Click the check mark. Remove the dancing end. So the first thing was to straighten it, and it still needs a little bit more, doesn't it? You see the columns here a little bit. So let's select all, edit, transform. Now I'm going to use distort. Actually, I would use not distort. I use warp, because I can grab this down at the bottom here and just move that portion off to the left a little bit without affecting the other parts of the image. And this one on the left side, move it to the right a little bit, straighten that. So I could work even more, but the idea was exactly what you went to, which is to say you need to straighten it. Now we have an image that doesn't show the height as we had before. What could we do about that?
Could you make it more narrow?
How would we do that?
Oh, I have no clue. That's why I'm listening.
Stretch it.
Okay.
You have
Anyone
stretch
else? If
and-
not, of
yes,
course, I'll tell you. Anyone else?
Stretch and crunch, those options.
Well, we could do that, but the easier way in this case, since we'll only be changing one dimension, we can go to image size and unclick the connection between width and height. And when you unclick that, I can change the height without changing the width. So I'll make it 16. Let's see what that looks like.
Kind of like
Like I
it.
said before, I always try to do the easiest technique to get where I want to go. So let's take a look.
Yeah, that gives it definitely more height.
Let's go back to the way it was here. And now we get, now that starts to give you the scale, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And the height. Do any of you remember my technique of stretch and scrunch? No?
Yeah.
Why, John, have you forgotten?
No?
In his canvas.
I recommend we scrunch something. What should we scrunch?
The top.
No?
The bottom too.
How about the sides that we pull
Oh,
it in
yeah,
more?
the sides for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So I selected that and then edit transform, free transform, and just move those in a little bit. And the idea of my coming up with this idea of scrunch was that it kept all the detail and moved things together. So I wasn't just cropping and losing detail. So I'll select, deselect. I'll do the same thing on the other side. Select, edit, retransform, hold the shift key and move it in. Accept that. Deselect. And crop. Now the image is really starting to look the height of the thing. Let's try a little bit more of stretching it. And I stretch it, but changing the size, changing the height. Remember, the link is deconnected. So I'll make it 18. Let's just see what 18 does. It may be too much. Let's see. We go back to how it was opened and where we are now.
John, when I
Wow.
suggested scrunching the top, I was thinking that the interesting part might be the organ pipes lower to de-emphasize the windows, unless you do something with the glare and make it an interesting statement.
Yes, indeed. Good point.
That's
In
where I
fact,
was coming from.
Yes, well, you're absolutely correct. Let's darken that. I'm going to do midtones at about 12%, 11%, just to darken the windows a little bit. We will scrunch also to see what it looks like, but you brought up a good point. And even more so, not only the windows, but darkening some of the architecture. Watch how that now brings you down into the image. And what is important down in the image? If I darken the little part here on each of the hair, the organ. Two ways to do that. One is to lighten it with the dodge tool, or let's use the sponge tool on saturate just to bring out some color as well as some highlights.
Above the organ, the ceiling has such a beautiful color.
Ah, yes, let's try
Bring that a
that
little bit more.
also.
And then on both left and right, darken that to bring your eye into the middle like you taught us.
There you go. Yes, indeed. You see how much more now you are bringing the viewer into where you want them to go in relation to the main part of this image.
Yeah, I like
Very
it.
good point.
Those lines above the organ is like leading lines to the organ. That part that you are pointing now, John, is the leading line to the organ. The leading
Oh my
lines.
gosh.
They're leading lines to the organ.
Yeah, you may want to emphasize them somehow.
Okay, one way to do that, good point, is leading lines are always so important. So one thing is when you use the burn tool, if you use it on shadows, it will only darken the darkest pixels. So I can bring, in a sense, contrast to that ceiling and only affect the very darkest areas, lines, then come back to the highlight and put it on highlights, back to the dodge tool and put it on highlights and come into the same area. And then as a result, I've darkened the darkest and now I'm lightening the lightest. So I'm actually creating local contrast.
Oh, wow.
What do you think of that? Let's take a look at the difference. See how we're bringing the eye into this.
Mhm.
Let's go all the way up to good recommendations by all of you. Here's the original. There's one last recommendation I would make on this. Anyone have an idea?
John,
Yes.
John, I'm just a little bit bothered. I'm very symmetrical. I look at pictures on the wall and you have to hold me back from not going over and straightening it out. And the window still on the right-hand side that's showing a bit, I
Yes. Good
get
point.
rid of that. I got
Yeah, I
to do
was
Yeah.
something to it.
too.
Absolutely. Good one. Good one. Good one. Good one. Very good. In fact, that was something I was not only recommending down there or up there, but these two windows down in the bottom could clone those out. I won't spend the time to do the whole thing, but cloning out those to remove them as a point of interest, because that is not the main area of interest. The main area
In any way we could do something that, it seems the windows at the very top compete with the picture in the bottom unless you bring in sun rays pointing down to the organ or something.
Good point. Two
Creative.
things. Yes, indeed. Good one. Very good. So let's think about scrunching it and see if that does anything. If not, we could
That already improved the focus.
yes, and then darken them even more.
Yep. We're just repeating things you taught us already.
No, that's right. I want to see that they're ingrained in you so that you can get into these things. Look at I want you to see the difference of what you just suggested because of how those are up there. And there's one more thing we'll do about that. But let's look at this prior to that, down to the bottom. See how now your eye comes down here even more.
Yep.
Mhm.
The last thing on this one, we'll go to another one, is that possibly don't even include those and then change the height again. And the more that you get into doing these kinds of things, the more you will be thinking about them when you're shooting, when you are capturing, and you'll include more in your image and give it more ability to change it in various ways. So
How would it look, John, if we went back to your scrunch selection and took it to camera raw and turned the highlights down on those windows?
Yep, let's do that. Good point.
Now, have you selected just the windows?
No, I didn't. I'm doing the whole thing. So you're absolutely right. We should select windows
Brush from there and just brush the
or
windows.
use the brush. That's right. But let me do the selection so that people understand what I mean about selection, because more and more selections have become so important and so valuable. Yeah. Let's do the exposure down some also. You guys are really getting good. Wow. Yeah, see, I missed a couple of the windows, but you got the idea of what he was saying and doing and how that changes the look of the image. Well done, guys.
John, on that last image, if you had to take that shot again, would you have included the organ below the pipes?
Yes. In fact, I would have, good question, how would I have shot it? I would have done two different approaches. One, I would have done an HDR. Probably would have done an exposure for the windows and exposure for the interior so that I could put them together and have even more detail in the windows. And the other, when I did that, I probably would have done a panorama. If I couldn't get it all in, I didn't have a lens that gave me everything, I would simply do a panorama, a horizontal vertical. So I'd shoot the horizontal of the upper part, bring it down, shoot another horizontal, bring it down, shoot another horizontal, overlapping by a third, and would do that with each of the different exposures. Now that sounds like a lot of shooting, but it is. But being in that cathedral and being able to capture that detail in a way that allowed me to do it in multiple ways, that's how I would have done it.
I've already noticed that in taking pictures, knowing what we've learned in Photoshop, you take pictures differently. I took some sunsets in Denver
Absolutely.
last, and now I just plan on bringing the panorama shots together,
Yes.
more bits.
Good.
It's a very horizontal scene.
Yes. Also think about the fact that if you want to make a quality print at some point, having a single shot of say 30 meg versus 3 shots of 30 meg each, you have 90 meg, and much better to being adjusting a 90 meg image than a 30 meg image.
Yeah, exactly.
So what would you do here? What's the first thing that you should think about doing on this image? Just right up front.
Remove that white in the corner.
Yeah.
No, something more important. What's the subject?
There is too much of the tree branch.
Yes,
in
right.
the photo.
Cropping it.
Maybe make it a vertical.
Yes. So the reason I say what is the first thing is do things that give you the base image that you want to use, the structure of that, before you start doing other changes, because you may not even need to do some other changes, but you want to put that structure of what is the purpose of the image? And to me, the purpose of the image is pretty much where we've now cropped it. So the first thing was to crop it. What else could we do? So let's key in on some other aspects. What other part of this is not really tying into bringing your eye into the bird?
There's a lot of branch in there.
There's a lot of what?
Branch, still the piece in the branch. I would even work on moving the bird down a little bit so it's maybe a little more centered, but you could cut it off when that lower branch doesn't do anything.
In fact, let's remove the lower branch.
Yeah.
It's distracting. This is very distracting.
I would just crop that out.
Yes, indeed. There are a number of ways of doing it. We can crop, but before we crop, let's try the content-aware fill.
Yeah.
And if you're doing it, my recommendation they have a very sophisticated one now, but this is a straight one, just drawing a line. Do a little bit at a time rather than trying to do a lot. And that really didn't take it out much. Let's try a little more. If that doesn't work, then we'll clone it. See, it started.
Well, the question is, do you really need the bottom branch at all? Why not?
No, going to remove it entirely. And
yes.
Yes. Now what I'm saying is, if you're using the lasso and doing it as a edit content aware fill, it's better to do it in small amounts because it then finds other pieces. That one it didn't do really well at all. So let's go back one step, and now I'll go to the clone tool. I have a soft brush, fairly large, so that I can pick up the tone of the sky in where that is. And then as I get in close to the trunk, I'll make it a harder brush so that I get a sharp edge. So I'll come up in a number of ways to do that, but I'll show it to you this way so that you know how to do some of them.
That's
What a
better.
difference in how that bird stands out now, that isn't
Yeah.
it?
Yes.
Yeah, that's better.
So we haven't even done more than the basics of, let me open it, crop. See the difference of just, what is the subject? It's the bird. Good. Now what is distracting? And we remove that. And now you come right up in there even more. A little bit more down.
It gives a feeling of the bird actually being more in the air.
Absolutely. And now we can crop up a little bit more from the bottom so that it brings the eye even in more to that bird.
Mhm.
I'd like to see brighter colors in the bird, you know, maybe the
Before we go
midtones.
there, how do you make it, before we go, I agree with you, but before we go to that level, and I'll explain why in a minute, what will make the bird stand out more?
Can you put little bit more glint in his eye?
Yeah, we'll get there also, but those are
Okay.
Darken the branch.
Darker
Nope.
background.
Contrast the
background.
branch?
dark in the
Darken-
background.
Darken the
So-
background.
Before I do that, I'll remove that little remaining piece of light area up there that was mentioned earlier. Just remove that so that we have same tone throughout. Now, what is an easy way to select this one, the background of this one?
The magic wand.
Yes. Magic wand, because it is a single tone throughout. So if I click, hold the shift key, click more where there's blue, I'm picking up all the various aspects of blue. I have it at 3x3 and I had it at 15. Really should have had it at maybe 33, or is usually the common one. But now I have all of the blue picked up. Let me get these last pieces here. So we have the background, even in around here by the inside of his two legs there. Now, how can we darken it?
Dehaze, you can try the dehaze first and see what happens.
To do the what?
Dehaze.
Dehaze?
Yeah, just try. I don't know, it's monochrome, so I don't know how it
So
would
going
do.
into Camera Raw.
Mhm.
But before we do dehaze, in the case that that it's all one tone,
Okay.
I would recommend using the
Punch tool?
color mixer.
Mm.
Click on the targeted adjustment tool and on luminance, put it in there and just move it to the left.
Okay.
Oh.
Now we have the background selected. If before I tell you how to do it, what would make the bird stand out a little better?
Invert the selection and lighten it some.
Exactly. I almost said it. Invert the selection. So now we have only the bird and the branch. So we could do an adjustment of levels, bring the highlights in just to the histogram so that we don't blow anything out, and maybe move the middle slider right just a little bit. So we now have it getting very close to maybe where we want to be. Let's look at from where we were starting. to where we are and
Wow.
how this subject really stands out. Now is where I had talked about earlier of doing subtleties of highlights and shadows. So if you want to darken the branch, I would get the burn tool, take it off shadows and put it on midtones. And make sure I'm on the layer with the pixels. Make my brush smaller. And just darken that highlighted area a little bit more of the branch, which forces the eye to come up to the bird. How do we brighten the bird a little bit?
Dodge or saturate, either one.
Maybe both. Let's try a little bit of saturation first. And then go back and see what it looks like. Okay, that's pretty good.
Mhm.
They're
Now,
using the sponge tool.
on the bird, often someone would use the sponge tool and use the dodge, which I will use in a minute, but they will dodge the whole thing. If you want the bird, in my opinion now, to stand out a little bit more, you darken the body a little bit, different than the head, just a little bit, and allow the head to be that much brighter. So then the bird stands out. Watch the difference.
Mm.
See the difference there? Watch the
Mhm.
body. Now the bird's head stands out quite a bit.
Mhm.
Really good. Actually, I burnt too much onto the background here before. So you really got in there, folks. What would be one last thing to do with this post, possibly?
Vignette, maybe.
Vignette, yes. Take it into Adobe Camera Raw.
John, on your screen, all we have is the bird. We can't see what you're doing in Camera Raw.
Oh, you can't. All
Well,
right.
I can. I'm viewing it on mine.
Me
You
too.
can?
I can see it.
I see
Oh,
it.
I see it.
yeah.
Right.
Oh, geez. Okay. I guess I don't. I don't know why.
Go up to view options at the very top of the screen.
Video options?
View,
Uh-huh.
view options. And
Oh, at the top of the screen, huh? I
very
don't know
top
if
of
I
your
have it.
monitor, at the top of the
Have you at any time enlarged your view of the photo by
Where do you find that?
pinching out? Well, on an iPad, you can spread the picture with your finger and thumb, but you lose part of the palette.
Right. I have that of the bird, but I just don't have the operation. Oh, there, I have the
Oh, there.
operations down. Okay. Thank you.
What's the difference of the vignetting?
Oh my gosh.
That helped it.
Isn't it amazing from what you guys,
Right.
you guys did this. You walked me
Mhm.
through from
John, I
initial-
still want a glint. Oh my God. I still want to vent a glint, excuse me, in the eye because I don't know how to do that very well.
Okay, let's zoom in on the eye. And here's a technique I'll use often. By the way, this banding is a result of using a very low JPEG when I did a lot of these things. One of the things to do is brighten it first with highlights, maybe about 8 or 10. And I will not move it around. I'll just click it a couple times to brighten up that eye. I just keep watching it to see how bright I want to make it. There you go. Then get the burn tool and put it on shadows. And by doing that, I've brightened the brightest area of the eye. And now I'm darkening the darkest area of the eye, which creates a contrast there. And as I did that, I'll come back and say, oh, I think the highlights could be a little bit more. And we'll see what I've done in a minute here. Just clicking on the eye.
There's a natural catch light up there.
Oh, wow.
What's the difference of the eye? In fact,
Yes.
I think the
I like
last
that.
thing I would do is to get the sponge tool out of the color. How's that?
Mm-hmm.
Looking better. There you go.
Quite a difference from where we started, isn't it?
Right.
Oh, yeah.
You guys did it
Definitely.
really well.